Hi, y'all. I just wanted to take a few minutes and introduce you to my friend Brad Golder with Evertree Insurance. And I've asked him to come to my office and answer a few questions about flood insurance, considering that we've just had this horrible hurricane come through and affect so many people and their home and their property.
Flooding is, as we've seen in the videos, rising waters from, a body of water, maybe a dam breaks, maybe there's mudslides. But where we see the water start rising in the streets, it gets into the house from the ground level, that is a flood. So you need a flood insurance policy to have that water covered. Now, sometimes people will say, well, my basement is flooded, or I've got flooding in my house because of a burst pipe, or because of a washing machine, dishwasher, bathtub. That's not flooding. That's covered on a homeowner's policy. So if you have water from within the house that finds its way and does damage, that's going to be covered under your main homeowner's insurance policy. Another incident we see is what's called a water backup or a sewer backup. That's where the lines going out of your house, suddenly the water, or maybe it's not water, the brown water starts coming back into your house. That is a endorsement to your policy. I think a good agent's going to add that as a $10,000 or $15,000 at minimum endorsement. If you've got a really nice basement, that's typically where it happens, is in the basement. You may want $50,000 or $100,000 in water backup coverage. But as far as a true flood, like we've seen from Helene throughout the Southeast, that is a flood insurance policy that you would need to have coverage for that situation.
The next question that most people are going to want to know is, what is the cost to add that?
Well, it's going to depend, from the many, many thousands if you're coastal, if you're low-lying, to, I've seen as little as, $400, $500 a year. Two different types of flood insurance policies. And first and most common is the federal flood insurance policy. Your coverage in those policies is capped at $250,000. But even though it's a federal policy, it's sold by agents. So you don't just go to the federal government and say, I want an insurance policy. You go to your insurance agent. This is a great option for somebody that has a very difficult to insure house. Somebody coastal Georgia, Savannah area, obviously Florida, Louisiana, some of the low-lying areas where the open market would not sell you a policy, or would sell you a policy for many, 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 many thousands of dollars. The federal policy is going to be probably your most affordable option. Again, those are capped at $250,000. So option one would be to get a federal policy. Option two would be to get a federal policy with an excess policy on top of it that's going to cover every dollar over $250,000 in dwelling coverage. So if you've got a, let's say $1 million house or $750,000 house, you may need more than just that $250,000 policy. If the federal policy is kind of priced right for you, you get that and then get the excess policy on top of that in the open market. The third option is, and I think we're seeing more and more of this, is companies are offering rates that are beyond the federal policy. Typically, if you're at a low risk area, you're not in a flood zone, you don't have any history of flooding, buying one of these policies that's not subject to the federal FEMA rates is going to be your better option. So most insurance agents can kind of help you determine what's going to be the best option, if it's to go through one of these non-federal policies, or to go the federal route to get your flood insurance.
We just need to contact our agent, I guess, to find out what it would cost for those of us in this outside the perimeter of Atlanta kind of.
There's a map that shows what your flood rating is, and certain flood ratings are going to, at least your mortgage is going to require you to have a flood policy. So those are going to be the more expensive ones, that if you're in the flood zone. But if you're not in a flood zone, that doesn't mean that it's not going to flood. It just means that it's less likely to flood. 500-year floodplain kind of thing, or 100-year floodplain. Sure. But there are probably a lot of people in North Carolina right now that weren't in a flood zone that can't get to their bedroom. So I think the stat that I saw was 30% of flood claims are with homes that are not in a flood zone. So it does happen, and it happens pretty frequently.
So, like when we heard that the hurricane was going to be coming and we had a couple of days' notice, can we call our insurance agent and say, hey, add this?
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Most flood policies require, typically the industry standard is a 30-day waiting period. So you want one on October 1st, it's going to be effective November 1st, for instance. There are some exceptions for closings, for refis, when the mortgage needs a flood policy, where you can get them issued inside of that 30-day window. But for the most part, you can't play amateur meteorologist, say, hey, there's a big one coming, I'm going to get a flood policy, and then cancel it 5 days later after it makes its way through, or after hurricane season ends. Doesn't work that way.
We'll need to contact our agent to find out exactly what type of flood insurance would be best for us in the area where we are and what we need to protect. We have to call you at least 30 days before the event happens, and the cost varies depending on a lot of factors that you've already mentioned. And then if a vehicle is in the way of the flooding, like for the hurricane, and a tree fell on a vehicle on your property, where does that fall?
It's going to fall on your auto insurance. So those are going to be, so your auto insurance is going to have collision coverage, and it's going to have comprehensive or other than collision coverage. So water getting into the car from flooding is going to be covered under your comprehensive, and then a tree falling on it, comprehensive. So those are non-collision physical damage to your car. So as long as you have that coverage, so most full coverage vehicles are going to have that. It's an auto insurance event.
Do you ever tell someone to not get flood insurance?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't have flood insurance. So it is, there's certain properties that it's pretty unlikely that it's going to flood. That doesn't mean that they can't flood. But properties that sit up high, that have a really good flood rating, it may not be something you need. You kind of have to use your best judgment, and you can go based on the flood ratings as to, how risky do the insurance adjusters who really study this stuff really think that your property is as far as flooding. But there's never a guarantee that it can't flood. But I think, certain risks you just kind of have to roll with if you're not really in a flood zone or in a really risky flood area. I don't have flood insurance, and I don't have earthquake insurance. We don't get a lot of earthquake events in Georgia. I think you'd be surprised at how, if it's really not in a flood zone, I think you'd be surprised how affordable the flood insurance is.
Oh, that's great information. So if someone had more questions or just would like to dig a little deeper, they could give you a call.
Sure. I'd be happy to talk about it myself. If you've got an agent that you're really comfortable with, feel free to reach out to that agent. If you need somebody, I'm a great resource. I'll provide my contact information at the end of this video, so that anybody can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, provide some quotes, and just kind of get a general idea of what a flood quote would be.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you stopping by and answering those questions.
Sure. Thanks, Rhonda.